What is it precisely? To inhabit a reality that gropes toward itself as a blind hand searches for its own fingertips in a labyrinthine chamber of smoke. The self is not merely an individuated point, but a procession of circumambient slippages, a network of contradictions that form the contours of a being which is perpetually unbecoming. To think, therefore, is not to elucidate, but to coagulate. Thought is an alchemical varnish that traps flux in the amber of transient coherence. The fundamental mistake of the naive philosopher is to presume that thought seeks truth. In its most advanced iteration, thought devours its own project, and truth is reconstituted as a sacrificial effigy burned in the name of the ever-receding real. The real in its preeminent absence is not a monolith, but a trembling. It moves like a thread tautened to its breaking point, oscillating between rupture and restoration. To claim to grasp the real is to shatter it with the very act of touching. This ungraspable dimension, which I shall term the Metacosmic Encaustic, is the lacquer upon the ever-fracturing mirror of existence. It is not the substance of being, but its reflective erosion, a persistence that carves absence into presence. Yet this carving is no act of violence. It is an intimacy so profound that it annihilates the boundary between the carver and the carved. We must now inquire into the nature of selfhood under this paradigm. The self, no longer a kernel of identity, but a smudged multiplicity, is structured not by what it is, but by what it fails to negate. Its being is a byproduct of the impossible task of self-negation, an edifice built of failed erasures. Here arises the condition of what I term subdermal reconciliation. This reconciliation is not peace, but a writhing truce, the mutual parasitism of contradictory impulses that sustain the illusion of a unified self. Like two serpents locked in mutual devourment, the impulses are bound not by agreement, but by the necessity of their opposition. Let us then consider perception, the supposed bridge between self and other. Perception is not a channel, but a puncture, a fissure through which the external hemorrhages into the internal. The act of seeing is not passive reception, but active mutilation. The seer carves into the seen, deforming it into the shape of understanding. Perception is therefore inherently parasitic, a siphoning of alterity into the egoic machinery of self-construction. What emerges is a simulacrum of the real, an encaustic rendering of the external that adheres to the internal like a second skin. But this second skin is not inert. It seethes with the residual vitality of the real it attempts to encase. Here lies the unbearable contradiction at the heart of perception. The more it seeks to encompass the world, the more it is encompassed by that which exceeds it. Perception, in this sense, is the primal tragedy of being, a ceaselessly thwarted aspiration to unity that succeeds only in producing a greater fragmentation. How then does one inhabit this condition without succumbing to the paralysis of its implications? The answer lies in the cultivation of what I call ontological agnosia. This is not ignorance in the conventional sense, but a deliberate unknowing, a refusal to congeal the fluidity of existence into the brittle constructs of certainty. Ontological agnosia is a praxis of surrender, an embrace of the perpetual instability that underlies all forms. It is to become a living question, to inhabit the interval between affirmation and negation, as one might inhabit a home built of shifting sands. Yet this praxis is not without its dangers. To dwell in agnosia is to risk dissolution, to approach the brink where the self becomes indistinguishable from the chaos it seeks to navigate. This brink is what I term the threshold of disintegration. To cross this threshold is to enter a state of radical permeability, where the boundaries of selfhood are not merely blurred but obliterated. It is a condition of ecstatic annihilation, a liberation so total that it extinguishes the very notion of liberation. The threshold of disintegration is not a destination, but a process, a continual unraveling that resists all attempts at finality. Those who attempt to dwell within this threshold without succumbing to its obliterative force must cultivate what I call epidermal resilience. This resilience is not a fortification but a flexibility, a capacity to bend without breaking, to absorb without assimilating. It is the art of becoming a vessel for the uncontainable, of allowing the real to flow through without being drowned by its torrent. But to speak of resilience is to evoke the spectre of suffering, for resilience is born of rupture. The question then is whether suffering is an affliction or a condition of possibility. In the context of the Metacosmic Encaustic, suffering is neither punitive nor redemptive. It is generative. It is the crucible in which the self is continuously unmade and remade, the fire that tempers the fluidity of being into momentary coherence. To suffer is to participate in the perpetual creation of existence, to be both the artist and the canvas upon which the real inscribes itself. In this light, the ultimate task of philosophy is not to alleviate suffering, but to reframe it, to reveal its necessity as the engine of becoming. This reframing demands a reorientation of thought itself, a turning away from the pursuit of certainty toward the embrace of contingency. It is to recognize that the highest form of knowledge is not the accumulation of truths, but the cultivation of a sensitivity to the fractures and fissures through which the real reveals itself. This sensitivity, which I term fractalic attunement, is not a skill but a state of being. It requires the dissolution of the egoic desire for mastery, the relinquishing of the need to possess or control. To be attuned is to resonate with the incomprehensibility of existence, to vibrate in harmony with the dissonance at its core. It is to become a conduit for the infinite, a vessel through which the ungraspable flows without obstruction. Yet even as I speak these words, I am struck by their inadequacy. Language, for all its power, is a blunt instrument, a chisel attempting to sculpt the wind. The concepts I have articulated are but approximations, shadows of the ineffable realities they seek to convey. But perhaps this inadequacy is itself instructive. To confront the limits of language is to confront the limits of thought, and in doing so, to glimpse the boundless beyond those limits. In the end, the Metacosmic Encaustic is not a framework to be mastered, but a mystery to be lived. It calls us to abandon the illusion of solidity and to embrace the fluidity of existence in all its terrifying beauty. It is an invitation to dance on the edge of the abyss, to lose oneself in the unending play of presence and absence, form and formlessness. It is, in short, an invitation to become fully, impossibly, devastatingly alive.